Sport is passion, competition, culture. But have you ever wondered where sport originated? And when did it begin? Today, we will take a leap into the past to answer these questions and discover the true origins of sport in a world of strength, honor, and competition. Welcome to our first journey into the history of sport. Even before the great ancient civilizations emerged, our prehistoric ancestors engaged in basic forms of sports. Cave paintings from the Paleolithic era depict hunting, fighting, and ritual dancing. These 30,000-year-old representations suggest that physical activity had a competitive and ritualistic dimension even then. Hunting itself can be considered the first form of human training. Young hunters had to develop strength, speed, endurance, throwing accuracy, and coordination. It is likely that prehistoric communities organized competitions and skill tests to select the best hunters and warriors. These contests were functional for survival but also took on ritual and social meanings, celebrating the participants' strength, courage, and skill. With the advent of the Neolithic period around 10,000 before Christ, societies became more sedentary and complex. This change led to a new conception of physical activity, which was no longer strictly linked to the immediate need to obtain food but increasingly connected to religious rituals, initiation ceremonies, and military preparation. The ancient Egyptian civilization has left us with extraordinary evidence of sporting activities. Bas-reliefs and tomb paintings, especially those from the Old and Middle Kingdoms, vividly depict various sports. Wrestling was probably the most popular sport in ancient Egypt. Tombs from around 2000 before Christ contain over 400 wrestling scenes with detailed representations of holds, throws, and techniques that demonstrate a highly codified system. Athletes wrestled either naked or wearing simple loincloths, and the rules appear to have been quite sophisticated. Boxing was another discipline practiced, with athletes wearing hand protection. Depictions of running races, long jumping, weightlifting, swimming, and water sports also exist. Archery was considered an essential military skill and an aristocratic sport practiced by the pharaohs themselves. Of particular interest are the acrobatic dances and rhythmic gymnastics performances that were often part of religious ceremonies and festivals. These performances had profound religious and cultural significance, and young dancers performed acrobatics that required great flexibility and coordination. The Egyptians also played ball games, though the precise rules are unknown. Some scholars speculate that there may have been team games that anticipated modern sports. In Mesopotamian civilizations, sports mainly had military and ceremonial connotations. Archaeological evidence reveals a culture in which physical activity was an integral part of daily life and military training. Wrestling and boxing were widely practiced disciplines. Assyrian reliefs depict ritual combat scenes that were likely part of religious ceremonies. Mesopotamian athletes also practiced weightlifting and strength tests to select and train warriors. Chariot racing was also practiced, though not as important as in other civilizations. These races were occasions to display power and wealth, featuring finely decorated chariots pulled by trained horses. An interesting aspect of Mesopotamian sports culture was its connection to astronomy and numerology. Some games and competitions were organized according to calendars based on lunar and solar cycles, reflecting the deep connection between physical activity, religion, and the observation of nature. When discussing sports in ancient times, our attention inevitably turns to ancient Greece, where sports reached an unprecedented level of development and became a fundamental part of Hellenic cultural identity. The ancient Olympic Games, traditionally dated to 776 before Christ, are perhaps the most significant sporting institution of antiquity. Held every 4 years in Olympia in honor of Zeus, the Games transcended simple athletic competition, becoming a religious, political, and cultural phenomenon of primary importance. Initially, the Games consisted of a single event, the Stadion, a race of approximately 192 meters. Over time, the program expanded to include running, wrestling, boxing, and the pentathlon, consisting of a running race, long jump, discus throw, javelin throw, and wrestling match. Later additions to the program included equestrian events, such as four-horse chariot races and horse races. These competitions were expensive and reserved for the aristocratic elite because they required owning and training costly animals. During the Games, a sacred truce was proclaimed, allowing athletes and spectators to travel safely through even hostile territories. This truce demonstrates the unifying power of sports in ancient Greece's fragmented political landscape. Olympic winners did not receive cash prizes. They received only a crown of wild olive leaves. However, the honor of victory was immense. Olympic champions became heroes in their hometowns, receiving privileges such as tax exemptions, free meals for life, and even commemorative statues. Some of these athletes, such as Milo of Croton, the six-time Olympic wrestling champion, became legendary. In Greek society, sports were not only a form of competition but also a form of education. Young Greeks trained daily in gymnasiums, public facilities where physical and intellectual education were combined. The gymnasium was much more than a modern gym. It was a cultural center where philosophers such as Plato and Aristotle taught, and where politics and art were discussed. Their body and mind were cultivated in harmony. Athletes trained naked, a practice that scandalized other cultures, but for the Greeks, it was a celebration of the human form. Greek sports were deeply masculine and exclusive. Women were generally excluded from participating in or watching the Olympic Games, except for the priestesses of Demeter. However, there were separate competitions for women, such as the games dedicated to the goddess Hera. The Romans inherited many Greek sporting traditions but transformed them, creating an unprecedented system of mass entertainment in ancient history. Unlike the Greeks, who celebrated individual athletes and the purity of competition, the Romans favored mass spectacles. Chariot races at the Circus Maximus, for example, could attract up to 250,000 spectators in an atmosphere of collective frenzy. The competing factions had passionate fan bases that sometimes erupted into violent brawls. Successful charioteers could amass immense fortunes and become celebrities adored by the masses. Diocles won 1,462 races during his 24-year career, amassing a fortune equivalent to what was needed to maintain an entire Roman legion for a year. Although we would not consider gladiatorial combat a sport today, it was a form of athletic entertainment for the Romans. Originally Etruscan funeral rites, gladiatorial combats became elaborate spectacles that could last for days with hundreds of combatants. Gladiators were specialized athletes divided into categories with different equipment and fighting techniques. They trained in specialized schools under the supervision of veterans. Contrary to popular belief, not all fights ended in death. Gladiators were valuable assets and were spared whenever possible. The Christianization of the Roman Empire made the pagan religious aspects of the ancient games unacceptable. In 393 AD, Emperor Theodosius I abolished the Olympic Games, ending a 1,000-year-old tradition. Gladiatorial combat was gradually phased out in the 5th century. The birth and development of sports in antiquity reveal much more than just physical activities. Ancient sports were a language through which societies expressed their fundamental values, such as honor, courage, strength, discipline, community identity, and their relationship with the divine. From prehistoric cave paintings to grand Roman amphitheaters, sports have accompanied human evolution, mirroring our aspirations and contradictions. The legacy of ancient sports lives on today. When we light the Olympic flame, celebrate our champions, and gather in stadiums, we perpetuate traditions that began thousands of years ago on the banks of the Nile, in the temples of Greece, and in the arenas of Rome. Our first journey through the history of sports ends here. What is your favorite sport? Write it in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, subscribe so you won't miss the next ones.